I have another really intense contraction, and at the end of that contraction, I start to involuntarily push on the street. Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. If we haven't met yet, my name is Eve. I am a former labor and delivery nurse turned birth doula and a Catholic mama. On this channel, I share a lot of educational content about how to prepare for a God-centered natural birth experience. I'm actually coming at you guys today with a really exciting and personal video, and I am going to share my latest birth experience with this sweet baby, Shiloh Ignatius. So Shiloh is our second baby on this side of heaven. We have a 2.5-year-old named Avila. Avila's birth story was actually what really got me into birth work. I was a nurse prior to having my daughter, but then really had this passion for birth ignite after my experience with her. And so that's a whole nother story that I will share about at some point. I had this miraculous, pain-free water birth with her, literally incredible. And so moving forward from that point, I was super excited to see how my next birth experience would play out. My birth with her was really unique in the sense that I was almost 42 weeks pregnant. They broke my water to start labor, which I'm not sure that I would do again now if I had to make the same decision, but it did work, and it was a really fast labor after that. I had her in my arms 5 hours after they broke my water, and so I was really unsure about what to expect. You know, they say that second babies usually come a lot faster than first babies, but my first labor was already so quick, and it was induced at that, so I was just really kind of stumped on what my body was going to do this time. At the end of my last pregnancy, the Lord really pressed me to, or I guess rather invited me to dream with him about what I wanted for my birth experience, but that didn't come up for me in prayer until like the end of my pregnancy. And it made a huge difference in how things went. And honestly, that changed my life and my walk with the Lord entirely. So from the beginning of finding out that I was pregnant, I decided that I would go ahead and start praying about this birth and this labor from the very beginning. So through my pregnancy, the theme of slowness and slowly and slow, it just kept coming up for me all the time in prayer. And then probably somewhere when I was like around 32 weeks or so, the phrase slowly then all at once started coming up in prayer. And that wasn't actually surprising to me because I have seen the Lord work like that in my life in general so much. I feel like things will seem like they're really slow in coming. I will bring something to the Lord, be petitioning his heart for what feels like forever and with no answer in sight, and it will feel really slow, and then the answer seems to come all at once. So that's also what I feel like was kind of being prophesied over this birth experience as well, and what was being given to me by the Lord. Still really didn't know what to expect or what that was going to look like or mean. Was I going to have like these early labor contractions for days and then pop out a baby? I didn't know, but there's a lot of things that I was specifically praying for this labor. And last time I really felt compelled to pray for a pain-free birth, and the Lord in his kindness and mercy answered that prayer. However, that's actually not something I felt compelled to pray for this time. I don't know why, but I just felt like God had something different to teach me in this birth and different for me in general. And while I still wouldn't have described the experience as painful, it was way different from the serene, peaceful birth experience that I had with my daughter. So we'll get there. But all that to say, I was petitioning his heart for some very specific other things, such as like very minimal blood loss because I did hemorrhage with my first birth. I was praying for a really peaceful, restful postpartum period and no shoulder dystocia. I hadn't experienced that before, but for some reason, I just really had that fear in my head that his shoulder would get stuck. And so, yes, was praying with all those things. And anytime I took it to prayer, I could not shake the image of me delivering this baby unassisted on our bathroom floor. Now, that did not entirely come to fruition. We'll get there, but there are parts of it that did. So that was the image that I could not shake, even though I really wanted another peaceful water birth this time. So this was a planned home birth with a midwife that I've actually worked with. I have assisted her. I've worked as her birth assistant at home births and in the birth center that she is a part of before. And I have a really really beautiful relationship with her. She's a believer. She's an amazing midwife, super, super knowledgeable. And so I had planned on a home delivery with her, but I also kind of toyed back and forth. The option of going to the birth center was always there for me, even to the end of pregnancy. We went through so many life changes while I was pregnant with this little one, including moving spaces, starting a new role, just lots of craziness. And so I was still unsure up to pretty much the very end if I was going to actually end up going to the birth center or if I was going to proceed with the home delivery that we planned for. And because I went to 41 weeks and 6 days with my daughter Avila, I also really assumed that I would be going past my estimated due date with little Shiloh as well, because I didn't want to get in my head about the dates. I told myself that I could actually expect to see this baby end of July, early August, which was closer to my 42-week mark. And just to preface, due dates, I don't think that are something we should cling on to a lot, and I actually have a lot of issues with the term or the phrase due date. I like to refer to it as a guess date. It's definitely more so a guess date, but for clarity, I am going to say that his due date was July 18th. It's not something that I shared with other people during my pregnancy, which is something I highly recommend. I told people he was going to probably be coming at the end of July, early August, closer to that 42-week mark for me, but his due date was July 18th. So the week of July 10th hits. At this point, I am approaching 39 weeks pregnant, and I have several nights of intense prodromal labor. Now, I thought that I had experienced prodromal labor in my first pregnancy. No, this was a different thing entirely. Like, this was real contractions that I actually kind of had to focus through, and they had some kind of a pattern to them. This was not the tons of Braxton Hicks coming every few minutes that were really confusing that I experienced at the end of my last pregnancy. This truly felt like labor contractions, except for it just never went anywhere. So July 10th was actually Nick and I's wedding anniversary, and because we had a couple of hurricanes that hit the city that we live in, we were displaced from our living space and actually staying in a hotel at that time. So things were just kind of crazy and a little bit chaotic, and it was that at that time when we were staying in the hotel that I had several nights of prodromal labor. I would have contractions that would actually start in my tailbone and wrap around the front of my belly. There was even one night that I actually woke up and got in the bath to see if that could make them go away, and I actually even threw up. So there was definitely a part of me that was like, is this the start of labor? And if it is, please God no, because I don't want to go into labor when we have no power or running water in our space, because that had happened as a result of the hurricane, and that's why we were staying in a hotel. However, even when I realized like this wasn't real labor, as I started to experience that night after night, I started to kind of think maybe he wouldn't be waiting until around 42 weeks and maybe we'd be meeting him sooner. And if he was going to wait until around 42 weeks, if this could not become our new nightly routine, that would be great. I was starting to feel really like exhausted and drained from that prodromal labor. So a few nights go by, the contractions actually stopped. I think that Nick and I did the mile circuit one night, like truly all the way through, and that kind of seemed to settle them down. And we also prayed that it would stop or that I would go into labor because it was getting so exhausting, and it did. It stopped about a week, maybe a little bit less than a week goes by, and on the evening of July 19th, so this is one day after this boy's guest date, July 19th, I went for a regular chiropractic adjustment. So we were doing labor prep at the chiropractor because obviously at this point I was 40 weeks and one day according to my estimated dates, and I thought I was just going to get adjusted, but I show up and she actually offered to do acupuncture for me. And I'd never done that before, but I was open to it, so we went ahead and went through with it, and it was really relaxing. I was actually super surprised. I was kind of scared because, you know, acupuncture, they do that with needles on different points on your body, and there is some pretty good evidence to show that acupuncture can help ripen the cervix, but I just had never really thought about trying it before. But again, I was open, so we did it, and it was actually a really enjoyable experience. That evening after my chiropractic appointment with acupuncture, we actually went swimming with a few friends, which was kind of like a normal part of our summer routine. My husband's a teacher, so he has the summers off, and we have a lot of friends in the area that we like to go swimming with during the summer. So we went swimming, we all kind of just hung out, and then we went back home and just had a really relaxing evening. My husband and I hung out, we lit a candle, he gave gave me a massage. Now at this point, I like was not actively trying to induce my labor. I felt really relaxed and at peace with whatever God had for this birth and whatever his timing was going to be. And I really did not expect it to be anytime within the next couple of days. Though I will say I was continuing to have increased Braxton Hicks at this point. Okay, so that night goes by. I felt great. I felt super at peace. We went to sleep. I figured that I would just wake up in the morning, have another day, and probably honestly have another week or so before we met him. But around 2:30 a.m., I woke up, or was woken up, I guess I should say, by my water breaking. It wasn't like a huge gush like you see in the movies, but it also was enough for me to know that it probably was my water breaking. Like, it was enough at that point for me to get up and turn over to Nick and say, my water just broke. Like, I wasn't like, was that my water? Like, I don't know. But it wasn't like this huge gush. So to preface, there is when your water breaks, it can break in a few different spots. And there is, your water bag sits around the baby. And if the part of the bag that is in front of the baby's head breaks, that's called the forebag. That's when you tend to get that big gush. I didn't get that. So I was thinking it was probably more like a leak or something at the top of the water bag. So I got up, I went to the bathroom, and I immediately saw bloody show. And within literal minutes of my water breaking, I started having contractions about 2 to 3 minutes apart. They were really manageable at that point, but they were there. I didn't have any doubt in my head if this was true labor or not. Like, I knew that I was at this point going into labor. So these contractions were like 2 to 3 minutes apart on average, but they were pretty short. They were like 30 to 45 seconds. And I was timing them off the bat. And I just have to say, like, I do not recommend this, okay? I didn't even follow my own advice. And that's one of the biggest regrets I have, I guess, about this birth experience, is I feel like I knew better than to be timing my own contractions, but I still did it anyways. So if you are planning on having your baby soon, I would just recommend ignore labor as long as you can. And at this point, I couldn't really ignore it, but I didn't need to be timing them. But I was just so in my head about when to call my team, or honestly, if I even wanted to have anybody there, that I was just way too in my head about it. So I wouldn't recommend timing your contractions, but that was the situation. They were 2 to 3 minutes apart and short. So after I labored for a little bit in the bathroom, I woke up my husband, like actually woke him up. I had woken him up to tell him that my water had broken, but once I started having contractions, I said, okay, you better get up and start setting up the room because I'm not totally sure how fast this is going to turn over. So we just wanted to be prepared in case things kind of picked up quickly, but we had fully the intention of going back to sleep, and that never did happen, but that was our thought. So I actually decided at this point to go ahead and hop in the shower and kind of get ready for whatever was to come. You know, I just wanted to feel like clean and put together somewhat. So I took a shower and I dried my hair and braided it and got in whatever I wanted to wear that was just like relaxing and comfortable. Again, contracting through this whole experience, but very manageable. So at this point, our room was set up, and what we did to set up our room was really just push the bed over, and I had my husband inflate the tub and then fill it up. And we filled it up from our bathroom sink, but because the water had been out after the hurricane, like I had mentioned, the water that was in the tub actually looked a little bit rusty and kind of gross. And I was like, I don't know if I want to get into that water. Like, it looks a little bit gross. It was kind of like orange. And so that was a little bit of a conundrum, but I just decided, hey, I'm going to keep laboring in the bathroom. We're going to think about this later. So I was laboring in the bathroom, kind of leaning over the counter. Probably my favorite time during labor was at this time where I felt like I was really in the zone. We lit some candles, I put my AirPods in, and I was eating watermelon actually in the bathroom, listening to some upbeat Christian music. Totally different vibe than in my first birth where I listened to like peaceful, calm worship. This time I was actually listening to a couple of artists, some like upbeat Maverick City and an artist named Ecclesia. Can't 100% recommend their music. If you know, you know, but very fun, upbeat music that was kind of getting me hyped up for labor. And so at this point, I was also kind of back and forth between sitting on the toilet and getting up and swaying my hips. And oftentimes the toilet is referred to as the dilation station because it's a place that your pelvic floor is really used to relaxing and opening up. So I was sitting on the toilet because honestly, my contractions would come and I would feel like I really had to pee. And that was a very obnoxious feeling. It persisted through almost my entire labor. I did not have that in my first birth, but it kept me feeling like I was kind of trapped in the bathroom a little bit. And so I was going back and forth between the toilet and and laboring over the bathroom counter. And truthfully, like, my husband was available, but I kind of just wanted to be left alone at this point. So he was just finishing getting things set up and we were just kind of hanging out. I was literally doing my thing. I went into the kitchen for a little bit. I sat on the birth ball for a little bit. And that was such a nice part of having a home birth. We didn't have to think about going anywhere. I was just in my own space and I knew that I wasn't going to have to leave. I also decided to listen to my baby through a couple of contractions because I have been trained in intermittent monitoring and I had a Doppler at home. So I just decided to make sure that he sounded good, and he did. He sounded perfect. And at some point we decided to give our friends a call to have them come and pick up our older daughter. And after we called, I actually went into her room for a little bit and laid down with her and got to snuggle her, knowing that this was the last time that I was going to see her as our only baby on this side of my belly. And that was just a really sweet time. So our friends got here, picked her up, and at that point I was still like talkative and just chilling. And so I had texted my midwife when I felt my water break earlier in the morning, and I had just let her know, but told her that contractions hadn't really rolled in yet, and I didn't text her after that. I was just kind of laboring, waiting to see where things were gonna go before I really wanted to have her come be on her way. And I knew that if I told her contractions were coming every 2 to 3 minutes, that she was probably gonna want to head here, especially with it being my second baby, but I just didn't feel like I was ready for that yet. So I hadn't texted her. But then after our friend came and picked up our daughter, I kind of settled back into the bathroom, had my little sacred space set up with like a crucifix and some candles and my essential oils and stuff, was still like listening to music, leaning over the counter. And I had a couple more contractions at that point that I felt some pressure, and they felt pretty intense to me, not like unmanageable, but just different than they had been feeling. So at that point, I kind of made the decision, you know, like, if I don't want to have this baby unassisted, it might be a good idea to just let her know and she can make the call about when to come. So I let her know, and her birth assistant started getting ready to head our way. And yeah, if I was to do anything differently, I would have just not been analyzing my labor patterns so much. I feel like I tried to doula myself because of my own training, but I really wish I had just put away the contraction timer, trusted the process and trusted my body knew what it was doing, and let Nick make the decision about when to call our team in, so that I just wasn't even thinking about that. And so it's at this point that things start to get a little bit blurry. So I believe that I filled up our bathtub because I didn't want to get in the birth pool. It just like intuitively didn't feel right or feel like time for me to do that, but also the water was still kind of gross. So I didn't want to get in the birth pool yet, but I did want some like help and relief from the water. So I filled up our bathtub in our bathroom, and I believe that I got in there and was just kind of peacefully laboring. And at some point my midwife and her birth assistant got there, I want to say around 6:30 a.m. or so, and I was just laboring peacefully. They came and took my vitals, they listened to baby, you know, all that, but then they really just hung out in our living room because I still really wanted to be left alone. To be honest, I kind of wish, looking back, that I had just gotten into the birth pool, or like, well, okay, so when my midwife got here, they emptied out that gross water and refilled it, and it was crystal clear. It looked perfect and it was a great temperature, so I could have gotten in at any point after that. And I kind of wish that I just had, but it, for whatever reason, just like didn't even occur to me, didn't feel right at the moment. So I was in our own bathtub and I was trying to take a water cup and pour water over my own belly at this point, but I couldn't because I had to focus too much. So I asked Nick to come and help me. He was pouring water over my belly, and that was a nice little break. I was, you know, really relaxed in the tub, but I started to notice my contractions were spacing out and I was falling asleep in between them. At this point, for whatever reason, I got super sleepy. So after a little bit in our bathtub, I decided to go ahead and get out and actually try to take a nap. And Nick was also pretty sleepy at this point too, so we were just like, we'll try to take a nap. So we laid on the bed. I had a peanut ball here at my house that I decided to go ahead and put between my thighs. So I was like laboring on my side, and I would fall asleep and then have a contraction that would pull me up out of that sleep. And again, not too bad, like definitely was managing, but for some reason that feeling of having to pee during them prevented me from being able to relax into the contraction. And that's what I really wanted to be able to do, because I know that helps labor progress and that makes labor so much more enjoyable. The more that you can really relax, the more that you can enjoy the process. But I could not relax because of that feeling of needing to pee, and I just kept constantly like getting up, going to the bathroom, coming back to bed, and then taking like short little naps in between my contractions. And when they would come on, it's not like I felt like they were super painful, but they were just annoying to me. I just kind of was starting to feel like agitated and like I just wanted it to be over. I just remember I kept thinking every time a contraction would come on, like, I just want this to be done. And then I got in my own head about wanting it to be done, because that was very different from my first birth as well, that I actually really enjoyed, and I wanted to be enjoying it, but I was not, to be honest. I just feel like for some reason I could not find my rhythm. So I decided to get up and go back to the bathroom, labor over the toilet for a little bit, and while I was on the toilet, I started to feel more intense pressure and almost like an urge to push, but it didn't quite feel like time for me to push either. Like, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it wasn't like this involuntary pushing that my body was doing. It's just like I felt like I wanted to bear down during the contractions, but it didn't feel right. So I was kind of wondering at this point if maybe I had a bulging bag. If we go back to when I said that the fore bag in front of the baby's head cannot break, but like a different part of the bag could break, I think that's what happened. I think I had like a leak somewhere in the water bag, but the bag in front of his head was really sitting on the opening of my cervix and making me feel that intense pressure. So I decided to go ahead and check myself at this point. So I was sitting over the toilet. I actually reached down, checked myself, and I was correct. I could feel that I had a bulging bag, but my cervix was about 4 to 5 centimeters open at this point. I knew in my head at that point that if my water broke fully, it would probably be over so fast, but I didn't necessarily, like it hadn't broken. And so I was kind of wrestling with the Lord at this point. Like, I wanted my water bag to break fully so that this would be over. I was feeling kind of agitated, but I also felt like God had something to teach me in this, and I wasn't sure what that was, and I didn't want to try to take control of the situation and get in the way of that. So I woke up Nick at that point. We had a discussion about having my midwife break my water, and he reminded me that this experience was meritorious, that the Lord probably had something in this for me, and I was like, you know what, you're right, I don't think I'm gonna do it. And then I had a couple more contractions that felt more intense, and then I said, never mind, I am gonna have her break my water. That's what we're gonna do. I want this to be over. I went back on everything we had just talked about, which, you know, it happens, but I all of a sudden though had this intense urge to go outside for a walk first. I was like, that's the plan. We're going to have her break my water, and then I'm gonna get in the birth pool, but first I need to go for a walk and get some fresh air, and then we'll come back and do that, and baby boy will probably be born within the next couple hours. So now I kind of think, looking back, that me wanting my midwife to break my water was kind of my equivalent in this birth of that, like, help me, I want to escape my body, and the like I need an epidural panic that a lot of women kind of experience at the end of their labor, where they just try to do something to like take control or escape the situation that they're in. And that can be a sign that you're in transition. But you know, I was so in my head and thinking I'm 4 to 5 centimeters, like I don't know exactly what I was thinking, but I just feel like I wanted to escape. And I think that was my version of that, because I wasn't in a hospital. I didn't say like I want an epidural, but I just felt like I wanted to escape my body. So I wanted her to break my water to make it be over with. And let me just say, I have so much respect for women who have these long, like days long labors. I had a client one time that was in labor for like 64 hours, and oh my gosh, she had an unmedicated birth. I don't know, girlfriend, like mad respect for you ladies who labor that long. And I just don't know, like I have short labors, or I've had 2 short labors, I guess, at this point, and both really amazing experiences, but I still just can't imagine like the exhaustion of doing that for days. So I'm grateful to the Lord that my labors are short. I know that doesn't always seem fair, but mad respect if you are in labor for like days. That's crazy. Okay, so we decided we're gonna go for a walk. I put on some clothes and we just go outside and start walking around in our neighborhood. At this point, it was probably like 8:45 a.m. So we get outside our apartment, we walk down the street. We're like 2 houses away from our apartment, and I have a very intense contraction. And I'm kind of hanging over Nick, and I like fully vocalize through it, which is another big difference from my first birth. I was very quiet during my first labor and birth. I only vocalized a little bit through like 1 contraction, but I was actually quite vocal during this labor and delivery. So I had an intense contraction in our neighborhood, like good morning to our neighbors, right? They probably were like sitting on their porch having their coffee, and they hear me like, I'm hanging on to my husband in the middle of the road, and this poor guy just like, he's probably on his morning walk. He walks by, sees me like big belly, like totally in labor. But so I have a couple contractions like that on our walk, in our neighborhood. So that one comes, we shuffled forward a little bit more and I felt a gush of liquid, but honestly, like I really did not think to myself in my head, that's my water breaking. I thought that I had peed myself. That's like genuinely what I thought happened. And I'm still not 100% sure, but there was like no part of me that was like, oh, my water just broke. But now looking back, I think that's probably what happened. It's probably then I, you know, walked a little bit and the gravity probably just made the rest of my water bag give way at that point. But I didn't know that. In my head, we were still gonna go back to our apartment and have her break my water. So we shuffle forward a little bit more and I have another really intense contraction. And at the end of that contraction, I start to involuntarily push on the street. Oh, Bobby, shh, 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 shh. It's okay. I know it's traumatic to remember. I know. So that contraction stops and I shout an expletive and I tell my husband, we need to go back right now. I'm pushing. If I'm not pushing, then I'm scared. And so we start walking back. Again, like only made it a couple houses away from our apartment complex. Start to shuffle back and then pause, have another contraction. I am fully pushing through this contraction, just like in the road in our neighborhood. So we keep walking back and by the grace of God, we made it back to our apartment. I literally hobble inside the door and I think my midwife and her assistant could just hear it in my voice, see it on my face at that point. My midwife gets up immediately and so does her assistant. The assistant says, oh, that sounds good. I remember hearing her say that. She said, oh, that sounds good. And I just like waddle into the bathroom. I don't know why I didn't come into our bedroom and get in the tub that was already set up for me. Like that would have been so ideal, but I just didn't. I don't know. It was just instinct. I waddled into our bathroom, squatted over the toilet, and within like 2 contractions, his head was born. So I'm like standing there squatting over the toilet. My own hand was like guarding my perineum, ready to catch his head, which is something that was so like as intense as this birth was because my golly was it intense, but I caught him myself and that was just like super cool and super rewarding. So standing over the toilet, his head is born, my hands are there ready to catch him, and then another contraction goes by and his body is born and I reach under his shoulders and bring him up to my belly and he cried almost immediately and it was amazing. And his cord was kind of short and so was my daughter's, so I couldn't like bring him all the way up to my chest, so he was just kind of like resting on my belly, and then I sat down on the toilet and I remember immediately being like, oh my gosh, that was the most intense thing I've ever experienced. When my daughter was born and she was crowning, I literally looked up to my husband and said, it doesn't hurt. And I'm not saying that this was painful because that's still not how I would describe it, but it was just like a lot. Like it was just a lot. His head literally felt like a bowling ball. And that's not to scare you because like I don't think it's scary. It was still an amazing experience, but it just felt like so much. I definitely felt like that ring of fire this time and it was just a lot of intensity and I roared him out. Something that is so funny. Oh my gosh. This is probably one of the funniest things that's like ever happened in my life. My husband has a light phone. If you know what the light phone is, or if you don't know what it is rather, you should go look it up. It's very cool. It's just like this tiny little dumb phone. And one thing though about it, that device glitches and pocket dials people all the time. So he pocket dials people on a regular basis, and our friends that had our daughter, I guess, had been the last people that he had called, which would make sense. So from 9:07 to 9:10, he pocket dialed one of our best friends who had our daughter, and there is a literal voicemail on his phone of me screaming and Shiloh being born. Literally, it's like the 3 minutes of him being born. It ends with his cry and you can hear like everything the whole time. It's just wild. So yeah, my midwife kind of guided my hands, but I caught him myself. I sat on the toilet. I was just like so taken aback that that just happened. It was just so surreal. Like, my gosh. It was awesome though. And I sat on the toilet for a few minutes and then eventually my midwife and assistant helped me get into my own bed for delivering the placenta. So I hung out in bed here, literally in this bed, for a little while before the placenta came, and then my midwife stitched me up. I had a deep 1st degree, so not nearly as bad as with my daughter. I had a deep 2nd degree with my daughter, and that recovery was a little bit challenging, but I had a 1st degree tear, but it was deep enough that I still needed stitches, or she recommended me to have stitches at least. So all of that was done though here in our own bed bed in the comfort of our own home. And I latched him and we just snuggled, and it was amazing. Because our friends had our daughter Avila, we were able to just take a nap once my midwife and her assistant left. We slept for a little while and then woke up in the afternoon, evening, and they brought our daughter over to us. We made little Shiloh a birthday cake. They brought us dinner, and then they went back with her for the night so that we could have one full night to recoup and recover and rest. My postpartum was literally a dream this time. My husband really was like firm that he wanted me to follow the 5-5-5 rule. If you don't know what that is, I will probably make another video on that at some point, but I think it made a world of difference in how my postpartum recovery went. I did not let myself rest and recover nearly enough after the first time, and going back to like, I had prayed so much about the postpartum this time, and it truly, like, the Lord came through in that. My postpartum was a dream. So yes, that's my birth story with baby number 2. It was almost everything that I did expect it to be, yet nothing that I expected it to be. I don't know how those two things go together, but it was crazy. It was beautiful. It's so interesting because even though my labor was overall longer than my first, it was 6.5 hours, I think, versus 5 with my daughter. It felt so much faster because I went from like still feeling like I was kind of in early labor to him being born within literally a matter of like minutes, like 15 minutes. So that was my home birth story with baby number 2, guys. I hope that you enjoyed that. I certainly enjoy thinking about it. It was crazy, but so fun. If you would like to see more weekly content where I share about tips for a God-centered natural birth, it would mean the world to me if you subscribed and stuck around to my channel. And yeah, thank you guys for being here. I will see y'all next time.